Maya Ellison had worked the dinner line at Cheval Noir for 3 years before anyone with real money ever looked at her twice, and even then it was only because the man in the wheelchair at table 12 had sent back his fourth plate of the night. She heard about it before she saw it. The kitchen was a small war zone of clattering pans and Chef Anders Doyle's rising voice, and when Maya pushed through the double doors to grab clean linens, she caught the tail end of it. Doyle stood red-faced beside the pass, a plate of Wagyu strip loin sitting untouched and cooling under the heat lamp. He says it's wrong. Doyle snapped at the runner.
Wrong.
I've been cooking steak for 22 years, and he says it's wrong. Maya didn't ask questions. She never did. She folded the linens against her chest and glanced through the small window in the door toward the dining room, where a man sat very still at the best table in the house, an untouched plate in front of him, his hands folded on the white tablecloth like he had all the patience in the world and none of it left for anyone in this kitchen. He was younger than she expected. Late 30s maybe, dark hair combed back, a black suit that fit him the way tailored things fit men who never wore anything off a rack. His wheelchair was matte black, expensive-looking even from a distance, the kind of chair that cost more than her car. Two men in dark suits stood a few feet behind him, not looking at him, looking at everyone else. Send the next one out cold, see if he notices, someone muttered near the line, and a nervous laugh went through the kitchen. Maya didn't laugh. She set the linens down and went back to bussing tables like she was supposed to, though her eyes kept drifting toward table 12 the way anyone's would when the air in a room bent around a single point. She had not always been a woman who bussed tables for a living. 2 years into culinary school, her mother's diagnosis had emptied every account the family had, and Maya had walked out of a classroom mid-semester to pick up double shifts nobody else wanted. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself that most nights, wiping down someone else's mess at 11 at night, the smell of someone else's finished plate still on her hands while her own knife skills went soft from disuse. She had gotten good at swallowing that particular kind of quiet grief, the kind that didn't announce itself, just sat behind her ribs while she smiled at customers who tipped badly and complained loudly. That night after her shift ended, long after the man had gone, Maya sat on the cracked front steps of her apartment building and called her mother the way she did most nights, more out of habit than expectation of good news. Her mother's voice was thinner than it had been the month before, worn down by treatments that cost more than Maya's entire year of tips combined. "You sound tired, baby," her mother said. "Long night. Weird night." Maya didn't elaborate. She never burdened her mother with the details of her shifts, the way certain customers looked through her like she was furniture, the ache in her feet by close, the particular loneliness of coming home to an apartment too quiet for one person who used to imagine she'd have a kitchen of her own by now. "How are you feeling?" "Same as yesterday, which is to say, still here." Her mother's laugh was small and worn but real. "You still cooking in your head even when you're not cooking with your hands?" "I can always tell." Maya smiled despite herself. "Always, Mama."
Good.
"Don't let that leave you. Whatever else this life takes, don't let it take that." She thought about those words walking to work the next evening, turning them over the way she turned over a recipe she hadn't perfected yet. By the time the fifth plate came back untouched again, the sauce barely disturbed, the owner of Cheval Noir himself had come out from his office, sweating through his collar, apologizing in a voice that cracked twice. Maya was close enough to hear the man in the wheelchair speak for the first time. "I didn't ask for an apology." His voice was low, even, the kind of calm that made the air around him feel colder. "I asked for steak I could eat. Sir, Chef Doyle is one of the finest. I know who he is." The man's eyes moved, slow and deliberate, across the room, and for one unbearable second they landed on Maya, who was standing too close with a bin of dirty glasses in her hands, forgetting to look busy. "I don't care about his reputation. I care about what's on the plate." The owner started talking again, fast and placating, and the man in the wheelchair simply raised 2 fingers off the table, and the talking stopped like someone had cut the sound. "Is there anyone in this restaurant," he said, "who actually knows how to cook?" Nobody answered right away. Then, from behind Maya, one of the line cooks, a 19-year-old named Petey who'd been hired 2 months ago and still didn't know how to hold a knife properly, pointed without thinking. Maya does. She used to cook the family meal before service. Doyle doesn't let her on the line, but she's better than half of us. Maya wanted to disappear into the floor. Every head in the kitchen turned. The owner's face went through 3 separate colors of panic. And the man at table 12 looked at her again, longer this time, like he was recalculating something. "Bring her out," he said. That was the moment the night stopped being a normal shift and became something else entirely. They put her in front of him without asking if she wanted to be there, which told her plenty about how things worked in his world before he ever said a word. Doyle stood off to the side, arms crossed, jaw tight enough to crack a tooth, watching a waitress get asked to do the one thing he had failed at 4 times in a row. "You cook," the man said. "Not a question." "I did before this job. Culinary school. 2 years. I cook the family meal for the staff most nights." Maya kept her voice steady, even though her hands weren't. "I'm not a line cook here. I bus tables and run food." "Why aren't you on the line?" "Ask him." She tilted her head toward Doyle without looking at him, and something in the man's expression shifted, small and sharp, like he'd just learned something useful. "What's your name?" "Maya Ellison."
Yeokang.
He didn't offer his hand, and she understood without being told that this wasn't an introduction meant to build friendship. It was information, given because he decided she needed it. "Cook me a steak, Maya Ellison. Whatever you'd cook if this were your kitchen and your reputation on the line, not his."
She almost said no.
She thought about it for exactly as long as it took to glance at the owner's face, pale and pleading, and calculate what would happen to her job if she refused a man who had 4 bodyguards and a chair worth more than her rent. "Give me 15 minutes, she said instead. She went back to the kitchen and took over a station that wasn't hers, and Doyle didn't stop her, which told her he knew exactly how much trouble the restaurant was in. She worked fast and sure, seasoning the steak heavier than the menu called for because heavy was honest, searing it hot in a pan that had been sitting empty and cold in the corner, building a pan sauce from the fond with shallots, and a splash of the good sherry Doyle kept locked away for himself. She didn't garnish it the way the menu called for. She plated it the way her grandmother used to plate a Sunday dinner, like the food itself was the only thing that needed defending, and for the first time in 3 years her hands remembered exactly why she had wanted this in the first place. When she carried it out herself, ignoring the runner who tried to take it from her, Jiho Kong watched her set the plate down with an attention that made her skin feel too tight. He cut into it. He ate a single bite. He set his fork down. Maya's stomach dropped, certain she'd failed in some way she couldn't name. "This is the first thing I've eaten in 3 days that didn't taste like nothing," he said, and picked the fork back up. Later, she would understand that this sentence meant more than it sounded like it meant. That night, she only understood that the tension in the dining room broke like a held breath finally released, and Doyle's face went through something close to grief, and the owner nearly sat down on the floor with relief. Jiho Kong ate the entire plate. He was the first person in the restaurant's history, she would learn, to send a compliment to the kitchen that wasn't really a compliment at all, but a demand. "I want her cooking for me tomorrow night," he said to the owner, not looking away from Maya. "Every night for the next 2 weeks. Name your price." The owner started to protest that Maya wasn't a line cook, that there were protocols, and Kang's eyes moved to him with a stillness that made the man stop talking mid-sentence. "I didn't ask for protocols," he said. "I asked for her." That was how Maya Ellison, 26 years old, 3 years into a job she'd taken because she needed rent money and the tips were decent, found herself standing in the private dining room of Cheval Noir the following night, cooking for a man whose bodyguards checked the kitchen for exits before he ever wheeled through the door. The private room had its own entrance around the side of the building, its own small kitchen station set up so that Maya no longer had to share space with Doyle's simmering resentment. She was given a knife roll that was hers alone, better steel than anything she'd owned since school, and she understood without being told that it was not a gift so much as a tool being handed to someone expected to use it well. She used it well. Each night she came in early before the bodyguards arrived to sweep the room, and stood alone at the small station thinking through what she would cook the way she used to think through exams, methodically, with a kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. She learned things about him in fragments, the way you learn about weather by living in it rather than reading a forecast. He never explained himself. He never apologized for the men who trailed him or the way conversations in the restaurant seemed to lower automatically when he entered a room. He simply existed at the center of a gravity that bent everything around him, and Maya, cooking his dinner each night in a kitchen that had been quietly cleared of anyone but her, found herself bending too, whether she wanted to admit it or not. On the second night, he asked her opinion on the wine his men had brought, a habit she found strange until she realized he asked because everyone else around him only ever told him what he wanted to hear. On the third night, he watched her hands while she worked instead of the plate in front of him, and when she caught him doing it, he didn't look away the way most men would have. He simply held her gaze a beat too long and then returned to his food like nothing had happened at all, though something had, and both of them knew it. On the fourth night, she asked him directly, because she'd never been good at leaving obvious questions unasked. Why me? There are chefs in the city who could cook you anything you wanted. I've eaten what they cook. He was watching her chop vegetables with the kind of attention most men reserved for something worth stealing. It tastes like performance. Yours tastes like it means something. Food is food.
No.
He said it simply, like correcting an obvious error. Food is the last honest thing left in most people's lives. Everyone lies to me, Maya Ellison.
My lawyers lie.
My accountants lie. The people who smile at me in this city lie before they've finished shaking my hand. A plate of food can't lie. Either it's good or it isn't. You cook the way people used to talk before they learned it was safer not to. She didn't have an answer for that, so she kept chopping, and if her hands moved a little slower than usual, she told herself it was only because she was listening. She learned, in pieces gathered from things he let slip and things she overheard from the men who guarded him, that the wheelchair wasn't something he'd been born into. 2 years ago, an ambush outside a warehouse in the industrial district had put 3 bullets in his spine and killed the woman standing beside him, a woman named Sujin who had run his logistics and, Maya gathered from the way his jaw tightened whenever her name came up, had been more than that to him. He didn't speak about her directly. He spoke around her, the way people speak around a wound too fresh to touch. You don't have to tell me, Maya said one night, when the silence after a mention of Sujin's name had stretched too long. I know. He looked at her, and something in his face was almost raw, almost young. I'm not telling you because I have to. I'm telling you because I haven't told anyone in 2 years and I don't understand why I want to tell you. Maybe because I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are, Maya said quietly. Nobody in your world seems to let you just be a man who lost someone. Everyone around you is too busy being afraid of you to let you grieve. Something in his face cracked open for exactly a second, quick as a struck match, before he closed it back down. You notice too much. It's the job, she said, and went back to plating, though her hands were not as steady as she wanted them to be. In the days after that, Kong changed the rhythm of their nights without ever announcing it. He started arriving earlier, before his men had finished sweeping the room, just to watch her set up her station in silence. He asked her once, almost shyly for a man who commanded rooms full of armed strangers, whether she had ever wanted to open a place of her own. Every server thinks about it, Maya said, not looking up from the onions she was dicing. Doesn't mean it's realistic. Why not?
Money.
Mostly money. Restaurants eat people alive before they ever open the doors. She glanced at him. You'd know something about that. Eating people alive. That's not the same thing, and you know it. But he was almost smiling when he said it, an expression so unfamiliar on his face that she found herself staring at it a beat too long. If money is the only obstacle, that's a solvable problem. I'm not taking your money, Ji-ho. I didn't offer it as charity. Something steadier moved into his voice. I offered it because good things should exist in the city, and you make one of them happen every night in a kitchen that doesn't deserve you. She didn't answer that directly, but she didn't argue either, and later, lying awake in her small apartment, she found herself thinking less about the danger circling him and more about the particular way he'd said the word deserve, like he'd meant it about more than just her cooking. The danger arrived on the 7th night, and it arrived the way danger in his world always seemed to arrive, sudden, precise, without warning. Maya was plating dessert, a simple thing, dark chocolate and sea salt, when the private dining room side door opened too fast and one of Kang's men came through with a gun already drawn, shouting something in a language Maya didn't understand but recognized instantly as alarm. Kang moved before she processed what was happening, his hand closing around her wrist and pulling her down behind the heavy oak table as the front windows of the private room shattered inward. Gunfire sounded like nothing she'd ever imagined, not the clean cracks of movies but a violent, splintering chaos that seemed to come from everywhere. Kang's body was over hers before she understood he'd moved, his weight pressing her into the floor. One arm braced against the table leg for cover despite the chair he could no longer stand from, and she felt the heat of him, the controlled fury of his breathing, close enough that every thought in her head narrowed down to the fact that he was shielding her with the only part of himself he could still use as a weapon. It lasted less than 2 minutes. His men returned fire, and whoever had come through the window either fled or fell, and then there was only the ringing silence after, glass scattered across the floor like ice. "Are you hurt?" His voice, close to her ear, had none of its usual stillness.
No.
Her own voice shook more than she wanted it to. "Are you?" He didn't answer that, which she would learn later meant yes, in the specific language he used to avoid admitting weakness. They pulled him back into the chair, and Maya, without thinking, without asking permission, reached toward a shallow cut on his forearm where a piece of glass had caught him. "I'm fine," he said, brisk and final, and caught her wrist gently before her hand could land, holding it a moment longer than the correction required. "Leave it. I've had worse than this, and lived to tell it badly." "Who is that?" she asked instead, because some things needed to be said out loud even in a room full of broken glass. "Someone who wants what's mine." His eyes found hers, and there was something underneath the calm that hadn't been there before. "You should have left when this started. Most people would have run. I was under the table with you. Where exactly was I supposed to run to?" That got something close to a laugh out of him, short and surprised, like he hadn't expected to find anything funny tonight. "Most people would have found somewhere." "I'm not most people," Maya said, and meant it as a simple fact, not an invitation. He looked at her like he was hearing something underneath the sentence anyway. The rival faction, she learned in the days that followed, belonged to a man named Victor Tran, a name spoken by Kang's people with the particular contempt reserved for someone who had once been an ally and had since decided loyalty was negotiable. Tran wanted territory that had belonged to Kang's family for 2 generations, and with Kang in a wheelchair, weakened in the eyes of men who measured power in physical terms, Tran had decided the moment to move was now. Maya kept cooking. She told herself it was because she needed the money, which was true, and because walking away now would look like fear, which was also true, but underneath both of those reasons was something she didn't examine too closely, the fact that she'd started listening for the sound of his chair in the hallway before she admitted to herself she was listening for anything at all. She noticed the way his shoulders unclenched slightly when she walked into a room. She noticed that he had started asking about her day, not out of politeness but out of something closer to genuine curiosity, and she noticed, most of all, that she had started answering honestly, telling him about her mother's illness, about the semester she'd left unfinished, about the particular ache of loving something you'd had to set down. He listened the way she cooked, with his full attention and no performance in it. The 10th night, he asked her to sit with him after the meal instead of clearing the table immediately, which she had never done before and which felt, in the small formal world of his private dining room, like an enormous shift in the ground beneath her feet. "You could report me," he said, without preamble. "For what happened? The gunfire. You could have called the police, told them a customer had a shooting in a restaurant. You didn't. Would it have helped?"
No.
"It would have made things worse for you specifically." He studied her across the table. "Which means you understood that already, and chose silence anyway."
Why?
Maya thought about lying, about giving him some easy answer about job security or fear. Instead, she told him the truth, because lying to him had started to feel like an insult to something between them she didn't have a name for yet. "Because I wanted to see what happened next. Because for the first time in 3 years of working here, someone in this restaurant actually looked at me like I mattered, and I wasn't ready to lose that over paperwork." Something moved behind his eyes, quick and unguarded. That's either the most honest thing anyone said to me in 2 years, or the most dangerous. Maybe both. Maya. He said her name slower than usual, like he was testing the shape of it. I told myself having you cook for me was about the food. I've been lying to myself for 10 days. The air in the room changed, the way air changes right before a storm breaks, heavy and charged and impossible to ignore. Maya didn't move. Neither did he, not because he couldn't, but because some part of this moment required stillness, required both of them to choose it deliberately rather than let it happen by accident. I know what you are, she said quietly. I know what your world is. I've seen what walks through that door with guns. I know. His voice had gone rough, honest in a way she hadn't heard from him before. I'm not going to pretend that isn't true, or that it will stop being true, because I want it to. I've spent 2 years making sure nothing could touch me the way losing Sujin touched me. And then a waitress cooked me a steak like she had something to prove, and I forgot how to keep that promise to myself. Maya's chest felt too full for the room to hold. I'm not her replacement. I know that too. His hand moved across the table, not quite touching hers, close enough that she felt the warmth of it. I'm not asking you to be. I'm telling you that you are the first person in 2 years who made me feel like a man instead of a target sitting in a chair everyone pities. I don't know what to do with that. I only know I don't want it to stop. She didn't answer with words. She closed the distance instead, her hand finding his on the white tablecloth, and he turned his palm up to meet hers like he'd been waiting 2 years for someone to offer him that exact gesture. They didn't kiss that night. It wasn't the moment for it, both of them too aware of the boarded-up window down the hall, the reminder of Tran's reach sitting too close to let either of them fall completely into softness. But something had shifted, unmistakable and impossible to undo, and Maya walked home that night aware that she had crossed a line she couldn't walk back from even if she wanted to. Tran's next move came 4 days later, and it came for Maya directly. She was walking to the bus stop after a closing shift, the streets quiet in the particular way city streets go quiet after midnight, when a black car pulled alongside her, and 2 men got out before she'd fully registered the danger. She didn't scream, didn't freeze the way she might have imagined she would. She threw the heavy thermos of coffee she was carrying directly into the nearest man's face and ran, cutting through an alley she knew from years of walking this route, texting Kang's head of security with one thumb while she moved, a single message. Trans men. Behind the restaurant.
Need help now.
She didn't wait to be rescued passively. She kept moving, doubling back through a side street that came out near a 24-hour pharmacy with cameras and people, calculating every step the way she calculated a kitchen during a busy service, thinking 3 moves ahead instead of 1. Her lungs burned. Her shoes, cheap and worn thin at the sole, slid twice on wet pavement, and both times she caught herself before she fell, refusing to let her body betray her before her mind had finished the plan it was building in real time. Kang's men found her 6 minutes later, breathless but unhurt, having successfully lost her pursuers in a maze of streets she'd known since childhood. When she was brought to him, safe, he came out of his usual stillness entirely for the first time since she'd known him, his hands closing around hers with a grip that shook. They could have killed you, he said, and his voice had no calm left in it at all. They didn't. She held his gaze steady, even though her own hands were still trembling with adrenaline. I got myself out. I didn't wait for anyone to save me. You shouldn't have had to. Something raw and furious moved across his face. This is my war. You were never supposed to be a target in it. I became a target the moment I cooked you a steak in front of witnesses, Maya said. You didn't drag me into this. I chose to keep showing up. That makes it mine too, whether you like it or not. He looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find, and when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something quiet and certain. Then we end it. Together. I won't have you living like this. The plan that followed wasn't romantic. It was tactical, cold, built over 2 days of careful movement, Kang's people gathering information on where Tran would be, when and with how many men. Maya insisted on being part of it despite every objection raised against her, sitting through 2 long nights at a table covered in floor plans and timelines, offering the one piece of knowledge none of Kang's trained men possessed, an intimate understanding of the restaurant's kitchen, its exits, its blind spots, the walk-in cooler's second door that most of the staff didn't even know existed. "You don't have to do this part," Kang told her the night before, his hand tight around hers under the table. "Cooking for me was never supposed to become this." "I know I don't have to." Maya didn't let go of his hand. "I'm choosing to anyway. There's a difference, and I need you to see it." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was memorizing it against the possibility of losing it. "I see it," he finally said. "I just don't know how to be a man who lets the person he cares about walk into danger for him." "Then don't think of it that way," she said. "Think of it as 2 people who refuse to let anyone take something from them without a fight." Tran, arrogant enough to believe a man in a wheelchair posed no real threat, agreed to a meeting at Cheval Noir under the guise of negotiating territory, walking directly into a room Maya knew better than anyone alive. The confrontation happened in the kitchen after hours, the space empty except for the people who mattered. Tran arrived with 4 men, smug and unhurried, clearly expecting an easy victory over a crippled rival. What he didn't expect was Maya, positioned near the walk-in cooler with a fire extinguisher in her hands, or the fact that Kang's stillness in that chair had never once meant helplessness. When Tran's man moved toward Kang with a weapon raised, Maya didn't hesitate. She swung the extinguisher into the back of his knee with everything she had, sending him staggering into the prep counter, and in the 2 seconds of chaos that bought, Kang's own hidden weapon came up from beneath the blanket across his lap and put Tran's ambitions to a permanent end before the man could reach for his own gun. The fight that followed was fast and brutal, and over in under a minute, Kang's men handling the remaining threats with the same economical violence Maya had come to associate with everything about this world. When it was finished, when the kitchen had gone silent except for ragged breathing, Kang wheeled himself toward her, his eyes searching her face for injury she didn't have. "You could have died," he said, echoing his words from days before, but this time his voice carried something closer to awe than fear. "So could you." Maya set the extinguisher down, her hands finally beginning to shake now that the danger had passed. "Where even now?" He reached up and pulled her down to him, and this time there was no hesitation in either of them, the kiss carrying 2 weeks of restraint and danger, and something that had been building since the first night she'd set a plate in front of him and watched a man who trusted no one decide, against every instinct he had, to trust her. "I'm not letting you go back to bussing tables," he said against her mouth, low and certain. "Not after this. Not after any of it." "I never said I wanted to." Maya pulled back just enough to look at him properly. This man who had built an empire out of stillness and precision, and who had somehow, over 2 impossible weeks, let her see beneath all of it to something that still knew how to want. "But I'm not going to be some quiet thing you keep hidden away either. If I'm in this, I'm in it as myself, not as a secret." "You were never going to be a secret." His hand came up to her face, careful in a way his hands rarely were. "Everyone in this city is about to know exactly who you are to me." In the weeks that followed, the city noticed. Word moved the way it always did in Kang's world, quietly at first, and then all at once, that the man who had survived an assassination attempt 2 years ago and lost the woman beside him now moved through his territory with a different woman at his side, one who had once bussed tables at a restaurant on the east side and now walked into rooms full of dangerous men without flinching. Some of his rivals underestimated her because of where she'd come from. They learned quickly that underestimating Maya Ellison was its own kind of danger. Maya never pretended the world she'd stepped into was safe, and Kang never asked her to pretend it was. There were still nights when his men swept a room before he entered it, still meetings that required her to wait in another building entirely, still the occasional glance over her shoulder on her walk home that had become permanent since the night trans men had come for her. But there were other nights too, ordinary ones, where he wheeled himself into whatever kitchen she was working in and simply watched her cook, no bodyguards close enough to overhear, no empire pressing against the walls, just a man learning slowly how to let someone matter to him without treating it as a weakness. Cheval Noir eventually let her go, unable to reconcile a bussing employee who now arrived in a car with tinted windows and left with a man the whole city seemed to fear and respect in equal measure. Maya didn't mind. She opened a small private dining concept 8 months later, funded quietly and without conditions attached, where she cooked exactly what she wanted for people who had learned, the way Kong had learned first, that her food was the most honest thing in any room she stood in. She hired Petey away from Doyle's kitchen within the first month because loyalty, she had learned from Kong, was worth more than seniority, and because someone who told the truth even when it cost him deserved a kitchen that would actually use him. She still remembered the way Kong had looked at her that first night, calm and immovable, refusing for plates because none of them had meant anything. She understood now that he hadn't only been asking for a better steak. He'd been asking, without knowing it himself, for someone who couldn't be bought or performed for, someone who would tell him the truth on a plate because she didn't know how to do it any other way. And on the nights when he sat across from her at her own small restaurant, watching her cook the way he had that very first evening, she understood that she had found the same thing in him, a man who had stopped performing the moment he stopped expecting her to run. If you made it to the end of this one, you already know exactly why this story hit different. Drop a comment telling me which line got you the most, hit subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and I'll see you in the next video.